Welcome to the Explainer. You know, history usually hinges on these massive, grand battles, or huge social movements, right? But today, we're looking at something entirely different. We're going to explore how a single, secretly intercepted message completely altered the course of global history. It's wild to think about, but a few lines of coded text literally dragged a deeply reluctant United States right into the brutal machinery of the First World War.
So imagine this terrifying scenario for a second. The year is 1917. Europe is absolutely burning in the fires of a devastating global conflict. The United States, well, they want absolutely zero part of it. But suddenly, out of nowhere, America faces a massive, highly secretive plot brewing for a southern invasion. Picture a foreign power conspiring to heavily fund your neighbor, literally urging them to cross your borders and take back entire states by force. Honestly, it sounds exactly like the plot of some crazy geopolitical thriller, but I assure you, this was incredibly real.
Section 1. The Illusion of Neutrality.
Let's set the stage here. Between 1914 and the spring of 1917, while these immense armies were just tearing across the face of Europe, the U.S. was firmly standing on the sidelines. In fact, President Woodrow Wilson had just won his second term in 1916 using the massively popular slogan, "He kept us out of war." The American public and the government were fiercely holding on to this hope of just staying peaceful and neutral while the rest of the world was in chaos. But, that hope was deteriorating fast. Germany's relentless U-boat campaign was pushing America right to the absolute edge. First, we had the tragic sinking of the British ocean liner Lusitania in May of 1915, and then the Sussex in 1916. The U.S. actually pressured Germany into adopting the Sussex Pledge, which basically forced them to warn ships before attacking. But as you can imagine, this completely frustrated the German military. So by January 1917, the German High Command meets at Plus Tassel and makes a highly aggressive, fateful decision. They're going to resume unrestricted submarine warfare against all shipping starting on February 1st.
Now, events like the sinking of the Lusitania sparked immense public outrage, completely dominating the front pages of papers like the New York Herald. And the German military commanders, guys like Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, well, they weren't foolish. They knew full well that tearing up the rulebook and attacking neutral American ships was almost certainly going to provoke the United States into declaring war. They saw U.S. participation as a very strong likelihood, so they desperately needed a drastic contingency plan in place before launching that aggressive naval campaign.
Section 2. A Dangerous Secret Proposal.
Enter Arthur Zimmermann. On January 16, 1917, the German Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs engineered what has to be one of the most audacious diplomatic schemes in modern history. He sent a top-secret message to Heinrich von Eckart, who was the German minister in Mexico. The instructions? Wait until it was absolutely certain the U.S. was entering the war, and then offer Mexico a stunning alliance. The terms were literally to make war together, make peace together, backed by generous financial support. And the kicker? In exchange, Mexico was to reconquer its lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The telegram even suggested that Mexico invite Japan into the alliance. The strategic goal here was pretty clear. By inciting a massive war right on the North American continent, Germany hoped to tie down American military forces on their own border. This would drastically slow down the export of vital American weapons and troops to the Allies over in Europe.
Section 3. Intercepted by Room 40.
But, as we know, a secret of this magnitude rarely stays hidden forever. Totally unbeknownst to Zimmermann, his absolute bombshell of a message was intercepted by Room 40. That was a highly secretive British naval intelligence unit. And the craziest part is the bizarre, convoluted journey this message had to take just to get there. See, the British had physically severed Germany's undersea telegraph cables way earlier in the war. So, Germany had to rely on a massive loophole. The U.S. actually allowed Germany to use American diplomatic telegraph channels, which, by the way, were strictly meant for transmitting peace proposals, just to communicate. So, ironically enough, this coded message proposing the literal dismemberment of the United States passed right under American noses. It went from Berlin to the U.S. Embassy there, passed through London, arrived at the State Department in Washington, D.C., and was finally relayed down to Mexico.
But as that message traveled through London, British intelligence was quietly listening. Down in Room 40, crypto analysts Nigel de Grey and William Montgomery got straight to work. And get this, by the very next day, they had already managed to partially decode the message, which was masked in the German diplomatic code 1340. All of a sudden, these two guys find themselves holding a diplomatic explosive. It was a plot that could completely manipulate global alliances and finally bring a fresh, powerful America into the fight alongside Britain.
Section 4. Protecting the Codebreakers.
Now, uncovering this secret created an immediate massive dilemma. Admiral William Reginald Hall, the chief of Room 40, suddenly had the exact evidence he needed to sway American public opinion against Germany. But he couldn't just hand it over to Washington. If he did that, he'd be revealing to the world, and crucially to Germany, that Britain had cracked their highly secured diplomatic codes. Even worse, it would expose the fact that the British were secretly eavesdropping on United States diplomatic traffic. No way they could let that happen. So Admiral Hall actually waited for weeks in agonizing silence while his team fully decrypted the text. To solve this totally unprecedented problem, the British devised a genius workaround, a cover story. The truth was that British intelligence had intercepted U.S. cables and broken the codes. But the story they decided to tell the Americans, and eventually the public, they claimed a British agent mysteriously named Mr. H had simply bribed a commercial telegraph company worker in Mexico to get a copy of the coded text. To make it even more convincing, the British gave the Americans an older code so the U.S. government could independently verify the message using their own commercial telegraph records. It was brilliant. It allowed Britain to sound the alarm without ever compromising their top-secret intelligence capabilities.
Section 5. The Mexican Response.
So, what happened once the telegram actually reached Mexico? Well, President Venustiano Carranza didn't just laugh it off. He assigned a military commission of generals to seriously assess whether accepting this German alliance was even feasible. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would Mexico even consider such a massive, risky undertaking? Well, to put it simply, their relations with the U.S. were deeply, deeply strained at the time. General John J. Pershing had just recently led a U.S. Army punitive expedition hundreds of miles into Mexican territory chasing the revolutionary Pancho Villa. There had even been actual fighting between U.S. soldiers and Carranza's troops in 1916. Given all this immense, volatile tension right there on the border, Germany was heavily banking on the idea that Mexico would jump at the chance for retaliation.
But Carranza's generals were firmly grounded in harsh reality, and they logically concluded that this conflict was just unwinnable. And they had a few really good reasons. First off, Mexico was already embroiled in a devastating civil war of its own. Second, the U.S. was just overwhelmingly stronger militarily. Third, Germany's promises of generous financial support, those were deemed highly unreliable. I mean, Germany hadn't even been able to provide gold for a Mexican national bank previously. Furthermore, the Commission realized that attempting to conquer and occupy a heavily armed English-speaking population in states like Texas would be completely impractical. And finally, launching a war would severely strain Mexico's vital diplomatic relations with other neutral South American nations. So ultimately, logic prevailed here, and Mexico wisely chose to maintain its neutrality.
Section 6. The Road to War.
Even though Mexico officially declined, the damage from the proposal itself was already done. The British officially presented the verified telegram to the U.S. government on February 24, 1917. Unsurprisingly, President Wilson lost every last shred of faith in the German government. Shortly after, the American press published the contents of the telegram on March 1st, and it set off a nationwide firestorm. Now, initially, there was some profound skepticism. A lot of Americans, particularly those with German ancestry or deeply held pacifist views, thought this whole thing was just an elaborate British forgery designed to trick them into fighting. But then, the unthinkable happened. On March 3, 1917, Arthur Zimmermann himself shockingly confessed to an American journalist. He stated simply, "I cannot deny it, it is true." He even admitted it again later in a speech to the German Reichstag. He completely destroyed any lingering doubt about the telegram's authenticity.
The public outrage resulting from this single, undeniable document pushed the United States inexorably toward the battlefield. That strong pacifist sentiment we talked about earlier, it rapidly evaporated. Coupled with Germany's newly resumed submarine campaign that was actively sinking American merchant ships, this blatant threat to U.S. territory was the absolute final straw. On April 2nd, President Woodrow Wilson stood before Congress and delivered a ringing war message, asking for a formal declaration of war to make the world safe for democracy. And just days later, the United States officially entered World War I.
We'll wrap up this explainer by reflecting on a rather profound thought. Has any other single secret message ever wielded so much power over global history? According to historian David Kahn, the author of The Codebreakers, no other cryptanalysis has ever had such enormous, world-altering consequences. It's a fascinating perspective, isn't it? It really leaves us to ponder just how fragile the course of history truly is. How differently might the 20th century have unfolded if not for a few intercepted lines of code, a brilliantly executed cover story, and a stunning public admission? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the pivotal moments that shaped our world.